Behind the facade of silence and stoicism, Alina's father, Andre, had been living a double life. For years, he had been deeply entangled in the shadowy underworld of human trafficking, a network of men and women who thrived on desperation and deceit. The ring he always wore wasn't just an heirloom, it was a symbol of his allegiance to this clandestine world. It marked him as a trusted middleman, a supplier. Andre's involvement hadn't begun out of greed. At first, it was desperation. After Alina's mother died, his small construction business had collapsed under the weight of debts he couldn't repay. One day, a man named Victor appeared, promising a way out, a chance to pay off his loans and secure a future for himself and his daughter. All he had to do was look the other way. Victor supplied the targets. Andre provided the introductions, the alibis, the logistics. At first, they were strangers, poor young women from the edges of society, girls no one would miss. But over the years, Victor's demands grew darker. The girls became harder to find, the stakes higher. Andre tried to resist, but Victor reminded him of his debts, of the men who could collect them at any moment with far more than money. When Andre ran out of options, Victor presented him with an unthinkable proposition. Alina. She's perfect, Victor said during their last meeting. Smart, young, beautiful. She'll fetch a high price, Andre. Enough to settle everything. No, Andre had growled, his fists clenching. She's my daughter. She's your way out, Victor replied coldly. Do you think they'll care about her being your daughter when they come to collect? This is the only way to save both of you. Andre had spent nights wrestling with the impossible choice. He convinced himself it was for her sake, that this deal would protect her from the wolves circling closer every day. He told himself that Victor had promised she'd be sent abroad, given a new life with opportunities she could never have here. But deep down, he knew better. He had seen what happened to the other girls. The day he removed the ring and left it on the coffee table was the day he finalized his decision. It was a small, symbolic act of detachment, a way to absolve himself from the guilt he couldn't bear. He couldn't look her in the eyes anymore, couldn't let her see the cowardice that had consumed him. The ring was the first thing she noticed. Its glint caught the sunlight as her father slid it off his finger and set it on the dusty coffee table. It was a thick, silver band adorned with an intricate crest, an heirloom passed down through generations, or so he claimed. To 17-year-old Alina, the ring had always represented strength and pride. Today, however, its placement felt ominous. Her father rarely removed it, and when he did, it was never for long. Stay out of trouble, he muttered, his voice low and detached as he reached for his coat. Alina furrowed her brow. Where are you going? She asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Work, he replied curtly, avoiding her gaze. That was the lie he told every day. Alina had never seen evidence of this so-called work. No paychecks, no uniforms, no coworkers. But her father had always been a man of secrets, a shadowy figure in her life who walked a thin line between love and distance. She never pushed too hard. She knew better. That afternoon, she picked up the ring from the table, rolling it between her fingers. It felt heavy, both in weight and in meaning, as if it carried the burden of unspoken truths. She slipped it onto her thumb. It was too large for her slender fingers, and stared at it for a long time. That ring, she would later realize, was the key to unraveling the horror that awaited her. The days passed quickly, and Andre became more withdrawn. Alina noticed the shift in his demeanor but chalked it up to stress. The day Victor arrived at their home was the day her fate was sealed. Andre introduced him as an old friend, someone who could help her get into a prestigious university abroad. Victor's charm was disarming, his promises alluring. Alina had always dreamed of leaving their small, suffocating town, and the prospect of a scholarship in Germany was too tempting to resist. Your father told me you're one of the brightest students in your class, Victor said, his smile warm but his eyes cold. We need minds like yours in the world. Andre sat silently as Victor outlined the plans, travel arrangements, accommodation, paperwork. He didn't meet Alina's gaze, even as she thanked him for the opportunity. Inside, his stomach churned with guilt, but he convinced himself it was for the best. The morning Alina left, she hugged her father tightly. Thank you for everything, she said, her voice filled with hope. Andre couldn't bring himself to respond. He only nodded, his fingers brushing against the ring he had placed back on his hand, a silent reminder of the price he had paid. As the bus pulled away, Andre stood on the platform, his heart heavy. He knew he had condemned her, but in his mind, he told himself a lie. She'll be better off without me. When Alina learned the truth, it shattered her. Sitting in the police station, surrounded by officers and counselors, she finally pieced together the fragments of her ordeal. Victor's trafficking network had been thriving for years, and her father had been one of their most loyal operatives. He had sold her, his only daughter, for money and safety. The scholarship, the travel arrangements, the promises of a better future, it had all been a lie. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, leaving scars that would never truly heal. When Andre was arrested, Alina demanded to see him. The confrontation was raw and brutal. "Why?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do this to me?" Andre sat silently, his face pale and gaunt. He finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I had no choice." "You had a choice," she spat, her voice shaking. "You chose money over your own daughter. You chose to throw me away." Andre's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't argue. He knew there was no justification for what he had done. Alina sat in the sterile police station, the room cold and impersonal, much like the story she had just recounted. Her hands trembled as she clutched a cup of untouched tea, her mind spinning. She couldn't stop replaying her father's betrayal, the moment she realized that the man she had trusted to protect her had handed her over to monsters. The officers spoke in hushed tones as they sifted through evidence, their expressions grim. The investigation had grown bigger than anyone expected, unraveling a sprawling network of traffickers that stretched across borders. Alina's testimony was the missing piece they needed, but every word she spoke felt like a fresh wound reopening. "They've arrested Victor," one officer said, his tone clipped but cautious. "He's refusing to talk, but we have enough to tie him to several cases, including yours." The news should have brought relief, but Alina felt none. Victor was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and the knowledge that her father had been the one to set her fate in motion overshadowed any small victories. When they brought Andre into the station, Alina barely recognized him. His once proud shoulders sagged under the weight of his actions, and his eyes, those same eyes she had looked to for comfort as a child, were hollow. The officers led him to a chair across from her, their presence a silent reminder that he was no longer a free man. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was suffocating, thick with unspoken words and unshakable guilt. Finally, Alina broke it. "You sold me," she said, her voice shaking. "Your own daughter." Andre flinched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't have a choice, Alina," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Don't you dare say that," she snapped, her fury spilling out. "You had a choice. You could have found another way. You could have fought for me. Instead, you handed me over to them like I was nothing." "I thought I was protecting you," he said, his words desperate but weak. "They were going to come after us. After you. Victor promised you'd be safe, that you'd have a better life." "A better life?" Alina interrupted, her voice rising. "Do you even know what they do to people like me? What I went through because of you?" Andre's head dropped, his silence louder than any argument he could have made. "I can never forgive you," she said, her voice breaking. "Never." Her words cut through him, and for the first time, she saw tears streaming down his face. But his remorse meant nothing to her now. The damage was done, and no amount of regret could undo it. After Andre's trial and subsequent conviction, Alina was thrust into a world she never wanted to be part of. Her story had become a beacon for anti-trafficking organizations, a rallying cry for justice and awareness. She was invited to speak at events and conferences, sharing her experiences in the hopes of preventing others from falling into the same trap. But every speech, every interview, was a reminder of what she had lost, her trust, her innocence, and the family she thought she had. Late at night, when the world was quiet, the memories would come rushing back. She would relive the moments of fear and betrayal, the desperate escape through the city streets, the weight of her father's ring in her hand. It haunted her, but it also fueled her determination. She threw herself into advocacy, working with survivors and law enforcement to dismantle trafficking networks. Each small victory was a step toward reclaiming her life, even if the scars remained. One day, while going through the evidence box from her case, she saw it, the ring. The officers had kept it as part of their investigation, but now it was being returned to her. Alina stared at it for a long time, the memories flooding back. For years, it had symbolized her father's strength, then his betrayal. But now, as she held it in her hand, she felt something shift. She took the ring and slid it onto her thumb, where it had once wobbled loosely. It fit snugly now, a testament to how much she had grown. This doesn't belong to him anymore, she whispered to herself. It's mine now. The ring no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a reminder of what she had endured and the strength it took to survive. Years passed, but the weight of her father's betrayal lingered in the background of Alina's life. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece, throwing her heart into advocacy work and helping others escape the horrors she had endured. The scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. They were a map of her resilience, a testament to her survival. One evening, she received an unexpected call from the prison where Andre was serving his sentence. The voice on the other end was firm but polite. "Ms. Markova, your father is requesting to see you. He says it's important." Alina's chest tightened. It had been years since she had last seen him, and the thought of facing him again stirred a storm of emotions. Anger, sadness, curiosity. Against her better judgment, she agreed. The prison was cold and sterile, the walls painted in shades of gray that seemed to sap the color from the world. Alina sat at a metal table, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The door opened, and Andre was led in. He looked older, thinner, and frailer than she remembered. The man who had once been an imposing figure in her life now seemed small and broken. He sat across from her, his eyes scanning her face as if trying to recognize the daughter he had betrayed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Thank you for coming," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here for you," Alina replied, her tone sharp. "What do you want?" Andre shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he said. "I know I don't deserve it. But I needed to see you before it's too late." She frowned. "Too late for what?" He hesitated, his hands trembling as they rested on the table. "I'm dying," he admitted. "Cancer. They say I have a few months, maybe less." Alina's heart twisted, but she kept her expression stoic. She didn't know how to feel, relief, sadness, or indifference. She had spent years trying to forget him, to erase the pain he had caused. Yet here he was, the same man who had betrayed her, now asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. "I don't know what you want from me," she said finally. "I don't have anything left for you." Andre looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I just wanted to tell you. I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I know that's not enough. It'll never be enough, but I needed you to hear it." Alina stared at him, her emotions swirling like a storm. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, picturing the things she would say, the anger she would unleash. But now that it was here, she felt tired. "I don't forgive you," she said firmly. "But I'm not going to carry you with me anymore. I've already spent too much of my life letting what you did define me. I'm done." Andre nodded, tears streaming down his face. "You're stronger than I ever was," he said. "You always were." Without another word, Alina stood and walked away. She didn't look back. The weight Alina had carried for so long began to lift after that meeting. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't absolution. But it was closure. For the first time, she felt free from the shadow of her father's choices. She continued her work, traveling the world to speak out against trafficking and support survivors. Her story became a rallying cry, a beacon of hope for those still trapped in the darkness. And through it all, she held onto the ring, not as a reminder of her father's betrayal, but as a symbol of her strength. Alina knew she couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. And she vowed to make it brighter, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed a second chance at life. The ring glinted on her hand as she stood before a crowd at her latest speaking event. She raised it slightly, letting the light catch it, and smiled. "This," she said, her voice steady and powerful, "was once a symbol of betrayal. Today, it's a reminder that no matter how dark life gets, we have the power to rise above it." The audience erupted in applause, but Alina's smile wasn't for them. It was for herself, a quiet, private victory in a life she had reclaimed as her own.